I need to say this up front, before the lights dim and the stories begin. Christmas isn't safe anymore. We pretend it is. We wrap it in music and memories, in soft sweaters and old jokes we've told 100 times, because believing in safety feels easier than admitting how thin it really is. Christmas teaches us to lower our guard. It tells us the world pauses for one night, that nothing bad would dare interrupt warmth like this. I've told hundreds of stories over the years. I've shared things people swore never happened, things police reports quietly corrected, things families agreed never to mention again. But these are the stories I waited years to talk about. Not because they're the worst, but because some details were never meant to surface, and a few of them are still being kept quiet by people who don't want attention drawn back to that night. Christmas creates blind spots. Doors get unlocked. Windows stay unlatched. Strange sounds get dismissed as wind or laughter or the house settling in the cold. We assume anyone knocking means well, because why wouldn't they? It's Christmas. That assumption has cost people more than they ever admit. When I think about it now, what scares me most isn't what happened, but how normal everything felt right before. The glow of lights against snow. The way sound disappears when the world freezes. The sense that something could be standing just beyond the reach of that glow, waiting patiently, while everyone inside feels safe. If someone involved in these stories is listening right now, they already know I shouldn't be saying this. But silence is part of how it survives. Once you notice these gaps, you start seeing how easily tradition can hide danger in plain sight every single year. The first story starts the way most Christmases do, with a family that thought nothing bad could happen that night. Christmas Eve was quiet in a way that only small towns ever get. The kind of quiet that feels polite, almost staged, like everyone agreed to whisper at the same time. Snow had been falling since sunset, thick enough to blur the edges of the streetlights and swallow sound whole. Inside, the house smelled like pine and something sweet my wife had baked earlier. A Christmas carol played softly from the radio, low enough to be ignored, but loud enough to make the silence feel intentional. The power flickered for the first time around 11. Just a blink, barely worth mentioning. I remember laughing and saying, "Of course it would happen tonight." My wife smiled, pulled the blanket tighter around herself, and said it would probably be fine. It usually was. Nothing bad ever happened here. That's what we told ourselves. The second flicker lasted longer. Long enough for the radio to cut out mid-chorus. Long enough for the house to groan like it was waking up. When the lights came back, something felt off. Not wrong, exactly. Just thinner. Like the room had more corners than it did a moment ago. The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow raps. Not urgent. Not frantic. Polite. I remember thinking how strange that was. Who knocks like that on Christmas Eve? I stood up before my wife could say anything, already halfway to the door, because that's what you do when someone needs help, especially on Christmas. When I opened it, a man stood on the porch, snow clinging to his coat and hair. He looked cold, but not desperate. His smile was tight, practiced. "Sorry to bother you," he said. My car slid off the road down the hill. "Phone's dead." His voice was calm, friendly. He didn't look like trouble. He looked like someone who belonged in a Christmas movie background, just another neighbor passing through. I told him to come inside, that we'd call for help. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt it. The warmth stayed near the ceiling, like it didn't want to settle around him. "Thank you," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Really, most people don't open doors this late." "It's Christmas," I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. He smiled wider at that. "Yeah," he replied. "That's why I figured you would." My wife brought him a mug of coffee. He took it without looking at her, eyes drifting around the living room instead. The tree, the hallway, the stairs, like he was checking something off. "Where exactly did you say your car was?" I asked. "Just past Miller's Bend," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Black sedan." I nodded, even though Miller's Bend was nearly 2 miles away. I told myself he was cold, shaken. People make mistakes under stress. The power flickered again. This time, the lights stayed dim. The radio didn't come back on. The man tilted his head, listening. "Funny how quiet it gets when the power's gone," he said. "You can hear people breathing." I laughed, because that's what you do when someone says something strange, but not strange enough to call out. "Guess so." He looked at me then. Really looked. "You're Mark, right?" My stomach tightened. "Yeah. Do I know you?" He hesitated, just a fraction too long. "Small town," he said. "People talk." That explanation should have satisfied me. It didn't. I noticed then that his boots were wet, but there were no footprints leading up to the porch. The snow outside was smooth, untouched except for my own tracks. My wife excused herself to find her phone. The man watched her go, his smile fading the moment her back turned. When she was out of earshot, he leaned closer. "You shouldn't leave doors unlocked like that," he said quietly. "They were locked," I replied. He smiled again. "Not tonight." The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard movement that wasn't mine. Fabric brushing fabric. A breath too close to my ear. When the lights snapped back on, the man was standing near the hallway, coffee mug untouched on the table behind him. "I think I should check on my wife," I said. "She's fine," he replied. "For now." That was when I told him to leave. My voice shook, but I said it anyway. He didn't argue. He didn't rush. He just walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "You'll hear it again," he said. The knocking. After he left, we locked everything. Checked every room. Called the police. They arrived late, annoyed, told us there were no reports of stranded vehicles. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. The report said unfounded concern. At 3 a.m, someone knocked again. They told me it was over. But every Christmas since, someone still knocks. I almost didn't include that story, but it connects directly to the next one. I need to step out of the story for a moment, because after I shared what happened that Christmas, the messages started coming in. Emails, comments, long posts copied from forums I hadn't visited in years. Different names, different towns, different decades, yet the details kept lining up in ways I couldn't explain away. The knock after midnight. The snow falling so heavily it swallowed sound. The power flickering just before everything changed. People quoted the same sentences back to me, phrases I'd never written down, spoken by strangers who couldn't possibly know each other. One man even used the exact words the visitors said to me, down to the pause before the smile. There's a reason these stories surface every December. Something about that night repeats itself, like it's following a schedule we don't get to see. Once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Every account obeyed the same loose set of rules. Don't ignore the knock. Don't assume you're alone. And whatever you do, don't open the door twice. Most of the people who wrote to me broke one of those rules. Some realized it just in time. Others didn't. One message stopped halfway through a sentence and never continued. I still check that inbox every year, even though I know better. I won't share the rule learned too late. Not yet. Because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And Christmas has a way of testing whether you were paying attention when the lights finally go out. The second story proves this wasn't coincidence. I found the tape by accident, which is usually how family secrets surface. I was home for the holidays, digging through a closet my parents never bothered organizing, looking for an old extension cord. Behind a stack of yellowed photo albums sat a cardboard box filled with VHS tapes. Most were labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Birthdays, school plays, vacations. One tape had no plastic case, just a faded sticker peeling off the front. Written on it in thick black mark were 3 words, Christmas '96. When I brought it into the living room, my parents went quiet in a way that felt practiced. My mother asked where I found it. My father stood up and took the tape from my hand like it might bite him. "That doesn't work anymore," he said. "You can throw it out." I asked what was on it. My mother smiled too quickly and said it was nothing, just an old recording, probably taped over. When I pressed, she added, "Some things are better left where they are. For the sake of family harmony." That phrase stuck with me. Family harmony. The way you might describe a lie that's been told so long everyone forgets it started as one. That night, after they went to bed, I found the old VCR in the basement. I waited until the house was quiet, then slid the tape in. The screen filled with static, then snapped into focus. The footage showed our old living room, smaller than I remembered, wrapped in tinsel and lights. My grandmother's voice came from behind the camera, laughing as she panned across the room. I could hear myself as a child, shouting somewhere off-screen. Everyone looked happy, normal. The timestamp in the corner read December 24th, 1996. For the first 10 minutes, nothing seemed wrong. People joked. Wrapping paper piled up. Someone complained about the snow. Then, if you watch closely, you notice things that didn't belong. In the background, near the hallway, a shadow moved where no one was standing. At first I thought it was the camera adjusting, or someone walking past out of frame. But the movement didn't match any person. It slid, slow and deliberate, retreating whenever someone glanced that way. On the audio track, there was a low hum under everything else, like interference. When my uncle spoke, the hum dipped. When my grandmother laughed, it rose again, almost like it was listening. At one point, my father leaned toward the camera and said, "Don't film the hallway." He was smiling, but his eyes weren't. My grandmother laughed it off and kept recording. That's when the dialogue started getting strange. My aunt, opening a gift, said, "This will matter later." Everyone laughed. A minute later, my mother looked directly at the camera and asked, "Is it still behind us?" Someone replied, "Not yet." I paused the tape. My hands were shaking. I rewound it, played it again. The words were still there. As the footage went on, people started disappearing. Not dramatically. They'd just leave the frame and never come back. No goodbyes. No explanations. By the end, only a few relatives remained, sitting closer together, voices hushed. The hallway behind them was dark, the light no longer reaching its end. The camera fell over at some point, landing on its side. From that angle, I could see the hallway clearly. Something stood there, tall and wrong, its outline shifting between frames. It didn't move like a person. It didn't move at all, except when the tape glitched, and then it was suddenly closer. The last clear audio was my father whispering, "Stop recording." My grandmother replied, "If we don't, it won't leave." The tape ended abruptly. The screen went blue, but the sound didn't stop. For several seconds after the image cut out, the hum continued, joined by a faint knocking sound. Slow, polite, 3 times. I ejected the tape and sat there in the dark, heart pounding. The next morning, I confronted my parents. My father looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. He admitted the tape had been copied. He didn't know how many times, or by whom. Only that someone else had kept watching it long after they agreed not to. "It doesn't like being ignored," he said quietly. That detail matched the first story perfectly. I was working Christmas night because no one else wanted to. That was the official reason. The unofficial one was that the building never stayed fully staffed on holidays, and everyone knew it. Fewer people meant fewer complications, fewer witnesses, fewer questions later. I didn't understand that at the time. I just needed the overtime. The facility was an old regional hospital wing scheduled for renovation, half shut down and mostly empty. A few administrative offices were still active during the day, but at night, it was mine alone. The halls were decorated anyway. Tinsel taped to bulletin boards. A plastic tree in the lobby. Speakers looping cheerful music that echoed too loudly off tile and glass. By 10 p.m., snow was already piling up outside, thick enough to blur the parking lot lights. My radio crackled every so often with routine check-ins from dispatch. "All quiet," they'd ask. "All quiet," I'd reply. That was the first rule, though no one called it that. Keep your voice calm. Don't draw attention to yourself. Around 11, the security monitors started glitching. Static rolled across one screen, then another. I tapped the console, cursed under my breath. Old equipment. Cheap maintenance. When the picture cleared, I noticed movement in the east corridor. A shape passed the camera, just at the edge of the frame. I grabbed my flashlight and headed that way. The corridor was empty, decorations hanging limp, lights buzzing softly. No footsteps. No doors open. When I checked the monitor again, the camera showed nothing at all, like the corridor didn't exist. That happened before? I asked over the radio. A pause. Then, probably interference, dispatch said. Weather's bad. At midnight, the music loop restarted. The same song. Same cheer. Same forced warmth. That's when the alarm triggered on the north exit. No reason. No breach. Just a red light and a dull chime. I didn't run. That was another rule, though no one ever said it out loud. I walked. Slow. Measured. Outside the exit, snow lay untouched except for a single line of footprints leading away from the door. They stopped 5 feet out. Just stopped, like whoever made them vanished mid-step. I reported it. Dispatch told me to log it and stay inside. The footprints were gone when I checked again. Things escalated after that. Doors opened on their own. Motion sensors tripped in rooms with no cameras. On the monitors, I'd catch glimpses of something moving wrong. Arms swinging out of sync, legs bending the wrong way. Worse, sometimes there'd be nothing on camera while I could hear it nearby, pacing, mimicking the rhythm of my steps without matching them. Around 2, my radio crackled. A voice came through that wasn't dispatch. It used my name. "Don't answer, dispatch cut in sharply. No matter what. That rule saved my life. The last thing I logged before morning was marked sealed. There's a reason the logs from that night are sealed. Others answered. Others broke the rules. By then, I knew Christmas wasn't random. We stopped celebrating Christmas the year it happened. Not gradually, not painfully, but all at once, like flipping a switch and never touching it again. One year there were lights and music and wrapped gifts stacked under a tree. The next year, December passed like any other month. No decorations, no visitors, no explanations. If you asked, my parents would say we just grew out of it. That wasn't true. The last Christmas we celebrated started normally enough. Snow fell early, soft and steady, the kind that makes everything feel quieter than it should. My mother cooked too much food. My father drank more than usual, but laughed louder to compensate. We kept the curtains open, letting the glow from inside spill out into the yard. Looking back, I think that was the mistake. I remember my grandmother asking if the doors were locked. My father said yes. She asked again anyway. That was the only sign anything was wrong, and even then, it felt small. Harmless. We were halfway through dinner when the power flickered, just once, long enough for the lights to dim and come back. No one spoke after that. We didn't hear anything. That's what people expect. Some sound to mark the moment everything changes. A knock. A scream. Glass breaking. There was nothing. Just a growing awareness that the house felt fuller than it should have. Like there were more people present than seats at the table. My mother reached for the radio and turned it on too loudly. Christmas music flooded the room, cheerful and wrong. I watched her hands shaking as she adjusted the volume, eyes fixed on the hallway behind my father. He never turned around. None of us did. It was an unspoken agreement, forged in that moment. Later, my parents told me some traditions exist for a reason. They didn't explain which ones, or why breaking them matters. They just said celebrating invites attention, and attention invites memory. Whatever happened that night wasn't finished. It didn't leave. It just learned our names. We moved shortly after. Not far, but far enough that neighbors changed and routines reset. December became quiet. Safe, in its own empty way. I learned not to ask questions. I learned that some absences are deliberate, and some silences are protective. Years later, I noticed something unsettling. Even without decorations, even without music, certain things still happened around Christmas. The house settling more than usual. The power blinking at the same hour each year. Footsteps in snow that led nowhere. My parents pretended not to notice. I followed their lead. If you're listening to this on Christmas night, and you've kept your lights on, your doors unlocked, your guard down, I won't tell you to panic. I won't tell you to stop celebrating. I'll just say this. Pay attention to what feels different. Notice what doesn't belong. Because once you acknowledge it, it knows you can see it. And if you hear something that shouldn't be there, it may already be too late. Before you turn the lights off tonight, I need you to understand why I'm telling you all of this. These stories aren't entertainment to the people who live them. They're fragments. Warnings pass quietly because saying too much has consequences. I've shared other cases before, and every year someone reaches out afterward to say they noticed the same patterns, the same gaps in memory, the same feeling that Christmas night doesn't behave like the rest of the calendar. If you've noticed something strange during Christmas, don't ignore it. That's how these things persist. Silence keeps them comfortable. Attention makes them restless. I'm not asking you to prove anything, and I'm not asking you to be brave. I'm asking you to be honest about what you've seen, and only if you're absolutely sure it wasn't just your imagination. Some of you will recognize details from earlier stories I've shared. The knocking, the power flicker, the way sound seems to disappear under fresh snow. Those aren't coincidences. They're patterns, and patterns mean intent. There are rules tied to that intent, rules people keep breaking because no one thinks Christmas counts. If you choose to comment, do it carefully. Share experiences, not conclusions. Theories are safer than certainty. There are things that react badly to being named outright, and I'd rather not give them more attention than they already get this time of year. I'll be back with more cases, because the stories don't stop just because the season ends. Next time, I'll tell you the rule nobody survives breaking, the one that turns a quiet night into a permanent absence. Until then, lock your doors, listen closely, and remember this feeling. The lights don't keep everything out. They just make it easier to see who's watching. Pay attention to what changes after you listen, because some stories linger, some follow, and some wait patiently for the moment you decide it was all just a story and then prove you wrong when the house goes quiet again at night alone.